Betrayal rarely announces its arrival with trumpets. It usually slips in quietly hidden beneath thick white lace and a dowry too good to be true. Duke Sebastian thought he was sacrificing his bachelorhood to save his crumbling estate by marrying a monster. He was entirely devastatingly wrong. Rain battered the tall arched windows of Sebastian's London study, mirroring the grim reality laid out on his mahogany desk. Spread before him were ledgers, promissory notes, and foreclosure threats, all stamped with the heavy red wax of his creditors. As the 9th Duke of Harrington, Sebastian had inherited an illustrious title and a spectacular mountain of debt. His late older brother Edward had possessed a fatal weakness for faro tables and French investments that never materialized, leaving the ancestral Harrington estate teetering on the edge of total ruin. We are entirely out of options. Your Grace, Nathaniel Hastings, his longtime solicitor said quietly from the opposite armchair. Nathaniel was a practical man, a man who dealt in numbers, not sentiments. The banks in Lombard Street have refused any further extensions. By the end of the month, Harrington Hall will be seized. The portraits, the silver, the land, all of it gone. Sebastian rubbed his temples, the dull ache behind his eyes intensifying. He was 28, handsome, deeply proud, and utterly penniless. There must be someone else, another syndicate, a distant cousin in the colonies. There is no one, Nathaniel replied flatly, except, well, there is one offer, an unconventional one. It arrived this morning by private courier. Sebastian looked up, catching the hesitation in his friend's voice. Speak plainly, Nathaniel. Lord Reginald Kensington. The name hung in the damp air, heavy and unpalatable. Reginald Kensington was an industrial titan, a man who had built a vast fortune on steel mills, railways, and ruthless acquisitions. He had everything a man could desire except the pedigree of aristocratic blood. The Kensington money was notoriously new, carrying the lingering scent of coal dust and factory sweat, making them pariahs among the polite society of Mayfair. Kensington wants a duke in the family, Nathaniel continued, leaning forward. He is willing to settle all of your brother's debts, every last penny. Furthermore, he is offering a direct cash dowry of £400,000 to restore Harrington Hall to its former glory. In exchange, he requires you to marry his daughter. Sebastian blinked, stunned by the sheer magnitude of the sum. £400,000 was a king's ransom. It was salvation. But the catch was obvious. Isabella Kensington, the beautiful one. I thought she was courting the Earl of Pembroke. Not Isabella, Nathaniel said, his gaze dropping to the carpet. The eldest daughter, Penelope. A cold dread washed over Sebastian. Penelope Kensington. She was the ghost of London high society, a cautionary tale whispered by dowagers behind silk fans. No one had seen her in over a decade. The rumours were entirely horrifying. A catastrophic fire in the Kensington country nursery had supposedly left the girl horribly disfigured. Gossip spoke of melted flesh, a twisted spine, and a mind fractured by years of solitary confinement in the dark wing of their manor. She was called the Monster of Kensington. He wants me to marry the recluse, Sebastian said softly, the reality sinking in. He wants to buy a coronet for a daughter no one will look at. The conditions are strict, Nathaniel warned, pulling a thick parchment document from his leather portfolio. There is to be no courtship, no public engagement, a private ceremony at St. George's next Tuesday. You are to take her immediately to your remote hunting lodge in Cornwall. Lord Kensington demands the marriage be consummated, and a certificate signed to that effect, ensuring the union cannot be annulled. After that, he does not care what you do. You may live in London and leave her in Cornwall, but she must officially be the Duchess of Harrington. Sebastian stood up, pacing the length of the dark study. He thought of his duty. He thought of the tenants on his land, who would be thrown out if the estate collapsed. He thought of his ancestors, whose portraits lined the grand galleries. He was being asked to sell his life, his intimacy, and his name to a disfigured stranger in exchange for survival. It was a business transaction, nothing more. "Arrange the meeting with Kensington." Sebastian commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "I will sign his contract." 2 days later, Sebastian sat across from Reginald Kensington in a lavish, overwhelmingly gilded parlour. Kensington was a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and eyes like chips of flint. He did not offer Sebastian a drink, he merely slid the marriage contract across the table. "You understand the terms, Your Grace," Kensington said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "My daughter has certain afflictions. She is not fit for society. You will provide her with your name, your protection, and a quiet life away from prying eyes. You will treat her with basic decency, but I expect you to remain out of each other's way. And you will ensure the marriage is unbreakable." "I understand perfectly," Sebastian replied coldly, refusing to show any weakness. "Your money secures my estate. My title secures your legacy. We need not pretend this is anything else." He took the heavy gold pen and signed his name. With the scratch of the nib, Sebastian locked himself in a cage of his own, bracing himself for a lifetime tethered to a phantom. The wedding day was as bleak as a funeral. A heavy, relentless November downpour turned the London streets into rivers of mud. Inside St. George's, Hanover Square, the air was frigid, smelling faintly of old incense and damp wool. There were no flowers, no joyous choruses, no extended family. Only Nathaniel stood as a witness, alongside Reginald Kensington and his younger daughter Isabella. Isabella stood near the front pews, wrapped in expensive Parisian silk, an amused, cruel smirk playing on her lips. She watched Sebastian with the eyes of a cat watching a trapped mouse. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the church groaned open. Sebastian held his breath, his hands gripping the wooden altar railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. Down the long, shadowy aisle walked his bride. Penelope Kensington was draped entirely in black and heavy ivory. A thick, opaque lace veil cascaded from a mourning-style bonnet, completely obscuring her face and neck. Her dress was bulky, shapeless, designed to hide her form entirely. She walked with a noticeable heavy limp, leaning heavily on a thick wooden cane with every step. The silence in the church was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic, agonizing thwack-drag of her cane against the stone floor. Pity flared violently in Sebastian's chest, quickly suffocated by resentment. This was his reality now. When she reached the altar, she did not look up. She kept her head bowed, her breathing shallow and ragged. Throughout the short, sterile ceremony, she did not speak above a faint, trembling whisper. When the vicar prompted Sebastian to place the ring on her finger, she extended a hand, covered in a thick, dark leather glove. He slipped the gold band over the leather, the gesture feeling absurd and hollow. They were pronounced man and wife. Reginald Kensington immediately stepped forward, a satisfied, almost predatory gleam in his eyes, and handed Nathaniel the bank drafts. The transaction was complete. The carriage ride from London to the Harrington Hunting Lodge in Cornwall took 2 grueling days. The carriage was large, yet suffocatingly small. Penelope sat in the furthest corner, still entirely shrouded in her heavy veil and cloak, staring out the rain-streaked window. Sebastian tried to offer her food, tried to ask if she was comfortable, but received only silent nods or shakes of her covered head in response. By the time they arrived at the desolate, wind-swept estate in Cornwall, night had fallen. The ancient stone house loomed in the darkness, isolated by miles of rugged moors. Sebastian dismissed the skeletal staff, ordering them to their quarters in the lower wings. He wanted no witnesses to the awkwardness of this night. He led his bride up the grand staircase to the master bedchamber. A fire blazed in the hearth, casting long dancing shadows against the tapestries. The wind howled furiously against the window panes, rattling the glass. Penelope stood rigidly in the centre of the room, still leaning on her cane, a dark, shapeless pillar in the dim light. Sebastian walked to the crystal decanter on the side table and poured himself a heavy glass of brandy. He needed the courage. He turned his back to her, staring into the amber liquid, preparing to deliver the speech he had rehearsed for days. "Madam," Sebastian began, his voice tight but remarkably gentle. "I know this arrangement is as unnatural to you as it is to me. I want to assure you that you have nothing to fear from my presence. I will not demand my marital rights. We will sign the consummation papers tomorrow morning to satisfy your father. But I swear on my honor, I will not lay a hand on you." He took a slow sip of the burning brandy, staring into the fireplace. "You will have this estate entirely to yourself. You will have an unlimited allowance, a full staff, and complete peace. I will return to London by the end of the week. We never have to see each other again. You may live your life exactly as you wish without judgment or cruelty." Silence stretched in the room, heavy and pregnant. Then a sound broke the quiet. It was a laugh. It was not a croak, nor a broken mad wheeze. It was a clear, melodic, startlingly beautiful laugh that sent a sudden shock-wave down Sebastian's spine. "That is a very noble speech, Your Grace," a voice said. Sebastian froze. The voice was smooth, cultured, and laced with dark amusement. It was not the trembling whisper from the altar. "Turn around, Sebastian." He gripped his glass tightly and turned slowly. The heavy cane lay abandoned on the Persian rug. The thick black cloak had been unfastened and discarded. Penelope was reaching up her ungloved hands, pulling the heavy pins from her bonnet. With a swift motion, she pulled the thick, opaque veil away, letting it fall to the floor. The brandy glass slipped from Sebastian's hand, shattering against the floorboards. Standing before him was not a monster. There was no melted flesh, no twisted spine, no grotesque scarring. She was without question the most breathtakingly beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life. Flawless porcelain skin glowed in the firelight. High aristocratic cheekbones framed large, piercing, emerald-green eyes that held a sharp, terrifying intelligence. Thick, cascading waves of raven hair fell over her shoulders, framing a slender, perfectly proportioned figure, clad in a delicate ivory silk gown. Sebastian stood paralyzed, his mind violently rejecting what his eyes were showing him. He felt the air leave his lungs. What is this?" he stammered, stepping back. "Who are you?" Penelope smiled, a cold, dangerous expression. "I am your wife, Penelope, exactly as the contract stated. The rumors," Sebastian pointed a shaking finger at her. "The fire, the limp, the scars. It was all a lie. Why hide away? Why pretend to be a monster?" Penelope's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of grim urgency. She stepped forward, moving with predatory grace, no trace of a limp whatsoever. "I pretended to be a monster because it was the only way to keep myself alive in my father's house," Penelope said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The fire was an attempt on my life by my dear stepmother when I was 10. When I survived unscathed, I realized my beauty was a liability. So I became the broken, scarred recluse. It kept me locked away, safe, useless to their social climbing." Sebastian shook his head, struggling to comprehend the massive deception. "But why marry me if you were safe in hiding? Why let him sell you to a bankrupt duke?" "He didn't sell me to you, Sebastian," Penelope said, closing the distance between them, her green eyes locking onto his. "He sold you to me. Or rather, he sold your land to his syndicate." She reached into the bodice of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, shoving it against his chest. "My father didn't pay £400,000 to give me a title," she hissed, glancing nervously at the bolted bedroom door. He paid that money to legally acquire Harrington Hall and all its surrounding moors through our marriage contract. You hold the deeds to the largest unmined vein of tin and copper in the country, worth tens of millions, and you didn't even know it." Sebastian stared at her, the blood draining from his face. "Even if that is true, the land belongs to the Duke of Harrington. He cannot touch it while I live." Penelope's eyes darkened with pity and terror. "Exactly, my naive Duke. While you live." She grabbed his lapels, pulling him close, her perfume smelling of jasmine and impending death. "You weren't meant to leave me here and return to London. The men my father hired are already surrounding this lodge. You are supposed to die tonight in a tragic, isolated accident on your wedding night. And by tomorrow morning, as your grieving widow, I will sign the entire estate over to Kensington." A loud, splintering crash echoed from the floor below, followed by the heavy thud of boots entering the manor. "They're here," Penelope whispered, pulling a small loaded silver pistol from the folds of her skirt. "Now we can either die as strangers, or you can trust the monster you married." "Which is it?" Splintering wood echoed through the cavernous bedchamber as the heavy oak door shuddered under a brutal assault. The fragile illusion of safety shattered alongside the doorframe. Sebastian did not waste a single second demanding explanations or succumbing to panic. The survival instincts bred into generations of Harrington men instantly took over. He grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace, his knuckles turning stark white, while Penelope kept her silver pistol raised, her emerald eyes fixed with deadly calm on the buckling wood. "There is a servant's passage behind the tapestry of the hunting hounds," Sebastian whispered harshly, stepping in front of her to shield her body with his own. "My grandfather used it to smuggle untaxed French brandy. It leads directly to the sea caves beneath the cliffs. Move, Penelope." Now, before the words fully left his lips, the bedroom door gave way with a deafening crash. 3 men, their faces obscured by dark woolen scarves, and smelling heavily of cheap gin and damp wool, poured into the room. They carried heavy brass knuckles and wicked curved blades, expecting a sleeping, unsuspecting duke and a terrified, crippled bride. Instead, they were met with a blinding flash of gunpowder. Penelope fired without a flinch. The lead bullet caught the first assassin in the shoulder, sending him spinning backward into the hallway with a muffled scream of agony. Sebastian lunged forward, swinging the iron poker with devastating force. He caught the second man across the jaw, a sickening crunch echoing over the roaring storm outside, dropping the assailant instantly to the Persian rug. "Go!" Sebastian roared, grabbing Penelope's hand. She didn't freeze. Dropping the heavy cumbersome skirts of her ivory silk gown, she darted behind the heavy tapestry, her fingers finding the hidden iron latch Sebastian had spoken of. The ancient stone wall yielded, revealing a pitch-black, narrow stone chute. Sebastian followed a fraction of a second later, dragging the heavy tapestry back into place and bolting the secret door from the inside, just as the third assassin hurled himself against the stones, roaring in furious frustration. The descent into the secret passage was entirely treacherous. The air grew instantly freezing, smelling of ancient salt and decaying seaweed. They stumbled down the steep, uneven stone steps, in utter darkness, the muffled sounds of the assassins tearing the bedroom apart fading above them. When they finally burst out of the lower exit, they were met with the full, unbridled wrath of the Cornish storm. Rain lashed at their faces like icy needles, and the wind howled furiously, threatening to tear them off the jagged cliffside. For hours they trudged through the unforgiving, desolate landscape. Sebastian guided them relentlessly toward a hidden smuggler's cove he remembered from his reckless youth, navigating by the faint, churning foam of the violent sea below. Penelope never complained, never stumbled, and never asked to rest. The pampered, broken recluse of London society was a complete fabrication. The woman beside him fought through the thick mud and freezing gale with the stamina of a hardened soldier. Finally, they reached the sanctuary of a deep, secluded cavern, sheltered from the biting wind. Sebastian collapsed against the damp rock wall, his chest heaving violently, his fine tailoring ruined and plastered to his skin. He struck a waterproof match from his silver case, lighting a small piece of driftwood to cast a feeble, flickering glow over their hiding place. He looked at his new wife. Penelope was shivering violently, her beautiful porcelain skin pale and smeared with mud, her exquisite dress torn to rags. Yet she possessed an undeniable, breathtaking majesty. "You used me," Sebastian stated, his voice low, echoing off the cavern walls. He was not angry. He was profoundly bewildered. "You knew your father planned to murder me. You used my desperate financial ruin and our wedding as a shield to escape his fortress." Penelope looked up, pulling her ruined shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. "Yes," she admitted flawlessly, her voice entirely devoid of apology. "I used you. If I had stayed in Kensington House, my father would have eventually poisoned my tea to ensure I could never claim my deceased mother's inheritance. I needed a legal reason to leave his estate with my personal trunks unquestioned. Marrying a bankrupt, desperate aristocrat was the perfect cover." She reached into the drenched bodice of her gown and carefully extracted a small oilskin-wrapped pouch. She unwrapped it to reveal a brass key, stamped with a highly recognizable insignia. "But I did not merely escape Sebastian," she continued, her green eyes blazing in the dim firelight. "Before I left, I accessed his private study. I stole his master ledger, the exact document detailing every bribe, every extortion plot, and the hired assassinations of 3 other landowners who refused to sell their mineral rights to his syndicate. That ledger is currently resting safely in a private vault at Couturier & Co. in London. I deposited it there the morning of our wedding." Sebastian stared at the brass key, the sheer scale of her brilliance washing over him. Reginald Kensington had sought to manipulate a desperate duke, but he had entirely underestimated his own daughter. Penelope was a mastermind. "He thinks we are dead." Sebastian realized a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his bruised face. "Those men will burn the lodge to hide their failure, and your father will assume his plan succeeded. He will move to claim Harrington Hall, and while he celebrates his victory," Penelope whispered, reaching out to gently touch the dark bruise forming on Sebastian's cheek, her touch sending an unexpected electric jolt straight to his heart. "We will return to London. We will retrieve the ledger from Coutts & Co., and we will destroy him utterly." In the damp, freezing darkness of the smuggler's cave, Sebastian realized the marriage contract he had signed was not a death sentence. It was the absolute best bargain he had ever made in his life. He took her cold, trembling hand in his own, pressing a solemn kiss to her knuckles. "Then we rest, my Duchess," Sebastian vowed softly, "and tomorrow we begin our resurrection." 3 weeks later, the atmosphere in London was thick with sensational gossip and fake mourning. Society papers mourned the tragic sudden demise of the young Duke of Harrington and his reclusive, scarred bride, who had supposedly perished in a devastating fire at their remote Cornish estate. Funerals were held, crocodile tears were shed by creditors, and the legal machinery of the Kensington Empire moved swiftly to consume the Harrington lands. To cement his newfound aristocratic triumph and publicly display his acquisition, Reginald Kensington hosted an unimaginably lavish memorial gala at his sprawling London mansion. He claimed it was to honor his late daughter and son-in-law, raising charitable funds in their memory. In truth, it was a grotesque victory lap. The grand ballroom of Kensington House was a beacon of vulgar opulence. Thousands of beeswax candles blazed in crystal chandeliers, illuminating the finest silk gowns and sharpest tailcoats of Mayfair's elite. Reginald stood at the head of the grand marble staircase, puffing on a thick Cuban cigar, a sickeningly smug smile plastered across his bearded face. Beside him stood Isabella, draped in ostentatious rubies, entirely failing to look sorrowful as she flirted openly with a young viscount. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reginald bellowed over the orchestra, raising a crystal flute of imported champagne. The music ceased, and the room fell into expectant silence. "We gather tonight to mourn a great loss, but also to look toward the future. As the legal inheritor of the Harrington estate, I promise to bring modern industry to those tragic, empty moors." He never finished his sentence. The heavy, towering mahogany doors of the ballroom did not simply open. They were thrown violently wide by a pair of massive footmen. The resounding crash echoed like a cannon shot over the silent crowd. Standing in the threshold, completely framed by the golden light of the hallway, was the Duke of Harrington. Sebastian looked magnificent, dressed in immaculate midnight blue evening wear, his aristocratic features set in an expression of cold, unyielding granite. But it was the woman on his arm who caused the collective breath of London high society to catch in their throats. Penelope was a vision of absolute, devastating vengeance. She wore no heavy veils, no shapeless black cloaks, and carried no wooden cane. She was draped in a breathtaking form-fitting gown of deep crimson velvet that accentuated her flawless figure. Diamonds glittered aggressively at her throat, but they were entirely eclipsed by the fiery, triumphant brilliance of her emerald eyes. She walked with perfect lethal grace, completely unscarred, and undeniably the most beautiful woman to ever set foot in the room. Gasps rippled through the assembled aristocracy. Women raised their silk fans to their mouths in shock. Men stared in absolute disbelief. The monster of Kensington was a goddess. Reginald Kensington turned the color of old ash. The cigar slipped from his trembling fingers, dropping onto the pristine marble floor. Isabella let out a high-pitched, genuine shriek of terror, clutching the banister as if the devil himself had arrived to drag them to hell. "You are dead!" Reginald choked out, his booming voice reduced to a pathetic, terrified wheeze. "The fire! The reports!" "Reports of my demise were entirely premature, Kensington." Sebastian announced, his powerful voice cutting through the silent ballroom like a freshly sharpened blade. He led Penelope slowly, deliberately up the center of the room. The crowds parted for them, like the Red Sea, terrified of the sheer power radiating from the couple. Though I must say, surviving an assassination attempt on one's wedding night certainly tests the strength of the marital bond. Murmurs of absolute horror and scandalous delight erupted among the guests. "Assassination!" Reginald sputtered, sweat pouring down his forehead. "This is madness. You are insane. Guards, remove this impostor." "No one is removing anyone. Lord Kensington." A new authoritative voice rang out from the entrance. Inspector Barnaby of Scotland Yard stepped into the ballroom, flanked by 6 heavily armed constables. In his gloved hands, he carried a thick, leather-bound ledger, the very ledger retrieved from the impenetrable vaults of Coutts and Company that morning. "We have spent the entire afternoon reviewing the financial records your daughter graciously provided Lord Kensington," Inspector Barnaby stated coldly, ascending the steps. "Records detailing extensive bribery of Crown officials, illegal extortion, and the precise payments made to the thugs hired to murder the Duke of Harrington. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, high fraud, and a dozen other crimes that will see you hang at Newgate." Isabella screamed as the constables grabbed her father's arms, snapping heavy iron cuffs around his wrists. Reginald thrashed violently, his face purple with rage, spewing vile curses at Penelope. Penelope merely stood beside her husband, her crimson dress pooling like blood on the marble floor. She looked down at the man who had tormented her, imprisoned her, and tried to kill her. She offered him a singular, chilling smile. "I told you once, Father, that keeping me in the dark wing was a mistake," Penelope said softly, though her voice carried perfectly to his ears. "You should have known that monsters grow stronger in the dark." As the police dragged the screaming, ruined industrialist out of his own gala, the ballroom erupted into total chaos. But Sebastian and Penelope paid no attention to the scandal unfolding around them. Sebastian turned to his wife, his heart swelling with a profound, overwhelming love that had been forged in fire rain and absolute trust. He pulled her gently by the waist, wrapping his arms around her amidst the bewildered aristocrats. "You are truly terrifying, my beautiful Duchess," he murmured against her ear. Penelope wrapped her arms around his neck, finally allowing the cold mask of vengeance to melt into a look of genuine, radiant warmth. "And you, my Duke, are remarkably good at following instructions. Shall we go home to Harrington Hall? Only if you promise never to hide your face from me again," Sebastian whispered, before leaning down to capture her lips in a deep, passionate kiss that firmly sealed their victory and their unbreakable future. Did you enjoy this thrilling tale of betrayal, survival, and unexpected love? High society is full of dark secrets, but truth always finds its way into the light. If Sebastian and Penelope's triumphant revenge kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button, share this video with fellow historical drama lovers, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating mysteries. Leave a comment below with your favorite plot twist right now.